Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a fascinating plunge into the training methods of Robert the Millmaker Leem, specifically looking at his approach to conditioning pit bull dogs.
Exactly. We're working from one of his YouTube transcripts, which gives us a pretty direct account of his, well, let's say, distinctive training philosophy.
Yeah, and the techniques he used. It's all shared in his own voice. Very informal, sometimes quite opinionated.
Definitely. And it's peppered with anecdotes, personal stories about specific dogs, different figures from the dogfighting world he was involved in.
Okay, so let's unpack this. For you, the learner, our mission here is to really get a handle on the core ideas of Leem's conditioning methods.
Right. What are the key principles he keeps coming back to?
Exactly. And pull out some of the maybe surprising details about his approach. We want to do this without getting sort of lost in jargon or feeling overwhelmed by detail.
So where should we start? He puts a huge amount of weight right at the beginning on his free turn treadmills. Why are these so important to him?
Well, yeah, that really seems to be a cornerstone for him. He champions his own design, this cutaway design, says it's just vastly superior for conditioning compared to what he calls strength-conditioned dogs.
That's an interesting distinction he makes right off the bat.
It is.
And he backs it up with a pretty bold claim, doesn't he? He asserts that dogs conditioned his way on these free turn mills by him, Sten, Glover, King Glover, they never had take bottom to win of the contest.
That's a powerful statement. It really underlines his belief in this specific method, this equipment.
Absolutely. It sets the stage for why this treadmill is so central to his whole system.
Right. And he gets into the specifics of it, too, the features.
He does. He talks about the cutaway part, says it's to stop toe injuries. Seems like a, practical thing learned from experience.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the three-point hookup system, the fact that it's set higher in the front than the back.
And that vibration detail. He mentions a foot vibration he thinks helps them turn faster.
Yeah, that's a curious one. The way he describes it, the boards rock, giving the dog more extension, almost encouraging a faster turnover.
He claims his treadmills turn over 3 times faster, maybe more. His son apparently showed even more rotations.
Suggests a real focus on the mechanics of the dog's movement and how the machine itself helps condition them in a specific way.
And the level of detail doesn't stop there. He mentions 24 adjustments for the roller tray alignment.
24. That's incredibly precise.
Yeah.
It really shows how much he believed in tailoring it perfectly for each dog.
Yeah, getting it just right. And he contrasts the recovery, too. Says on his design, dogs can just jingle along, recover easier than on other treadmills where they might still be sort of pulling or straining.
Okay, so the treadmill is clearly fundamental.
Okay.
But what about his broader philosophy? Beyond the machine itself, what are the main ideas behind his training?
Well, from his description, a huge focus seems to be on respiratory recovery. That comes up again and again.
Right, and he emphasizes letting the dog kind of set its own work schedule on the mill.
Exactly. These short, intense bursts, he calls it, being on top, and then longer periods where they're just long striding, recovering.
It sounds almost like a self-directed interval training. What's the thinking there? How does he manage that?
Well, monitoring seems key. He talks about using a polar heart rate watch. That physiological data, the heart rate, tells him how well the dog is recovering.
I see. So it's not just about time or distance, it's about the dog's actual response.
Precisely. And he adjusts the training based on that recovery. He talks about gradually adding work, like 5 minutes to a session, until he sees what he calls bad recovery.
And that's the signal, right? That's the point where the dog's being pushed too hard, overtrained.
Seems so. It highlights that focus on avoiding overtraining, which you see in lots of athletic training, really, even if the context here is, well, very different.
And then as a competition or contest approaches, he has a very specific taper plan.
Yeah, very structured. Cut the work in half, 3 days out, he says, then half it again the day before.
And a really short session, just 12 hours before if they're not traveling. It's all geared towards having the dog absolutely peaked for the day.
And he's quite emphatic about not overworking them. Warns about dehydration, but also about depleting what he calls life-sustaining fat.
Ah, yes, that life-sustaining fat. He sees that as crucial for energy, for endurance in a fight.
Exactly. And he criticizes other methods, this strength conditioning he mentions, suggesting they cause lactic acid buildup, overheating.
When he says strength conditioning, what do you think he means? Like weight pulling, maybe? Resistance work.
That seems like a reasonable guess. He's definitely contrasting it with his focus on cardio endurance and, crucially, that recovery piece.
He also mentions using something called a flying Jenny, but only for short bursts.
Right. Says it's good for building condition, burning fat, but again, the key is not straining the dog. Short and sharp, it seems.
And then after the exercise, the cool down.
Water hose. He specifically says to use a water hose to cool the dog down, believes it helps stop lactic acid buildup.
Interesting. A bit more old school, perhaps. And it wasn't just the work and cool down, was it? He talks about rubbing and massaging the dogs, too.
Yes, definitely. He sees that as really important for their recovery and overall condition, a very hands-on approach.
Which leads naturally into the feeding side of things, doesn't it? What he calls the keep.
The keep sounds like a critical period. And he stresses, starting young, aiming for a thin waist from puppyhood, cautions against overfeeding, against excess water weight.
So what does the diet actually look like during this keep phase?
He describes feeding small amounts, but frequently, highly digestible protein like chicken with oil, tiny bits of lean red meat, he says, golf ball size.
Just tiny amounts and then supplements. He lists quite a few.
He does. Metabolol, brewer's yeast, royal gelatin, vitamin C, Carbolex, a very specific mix.
Any rationale given? Why those specific things?
Well, he talks about digestion being important. Feeding food slightly warm, using brewer's yeast because he thinks it increases stomach acid, helps break things down.
Okay, and this all ties back to that concept of life-sustaining fat, right?
Absolutely. He believes this fat is just essential for endurance, for preventing a dog from taking bottom, as he puts it, being forced onto the defensive.
And he contrasts this with commercial feeds, doesn't he? He's critical of ones heavy in chemicals, thinks they actually deplete this crucial fat reserve.
Yeah, he sees his way as building a natural, slow-burning fuel source. Now, woven all through this technical stuff are these anecdotes, his pretty strong opinions about the dogfighting world itself.
Right, and it's important for you, the learner, that we approach these impartially. We're reporting what he said, understanding it as his perspective from within that subculture, not endorsing it.
Exactly. So he talks about a fight between dogs named Tuffy and Blue, and he's quite critical of Bobby Hull's sportsmanship in that account.
He clearly thought very highly of Tuffy, though. Calls him the greatest fighting dog he ever saw.
And he directly links Tuffy's success to being conditioned on one of his free-turn treadmills.
Then there's the story of how he bought the gunner dog cheaply. Why? Because it had respiratory failure in a previous fight.
Which, again, ties right back to his whole emphasis on proper conditioning and respiratory recovery.
He also recounts losing a fight with a dog called Big Bear, and he blames it on an experiment, giving the dog desiccated liver pills.
It really underscores how much he believed in sticking to his specific nutritional plan, avoiding variables.
It does. And he doesn't shy away from accusations either. He directly accuses Don Mayfield of cheating in a fight involving a dog named Sneedly.
These stories give a raw, unfiltered glimpse into how competitive and sometimes contentious that world could be.
He also discusses matching males and females, believes hormones mean one will eventually give way.
And he criticizes how another dog, 400, was conditioned. Says using only the flying Jenny without proper recovery left the dog a shell.
Seems consistent with his philosophy. She also mentions people actively avoiding certain matches, like hiding 47-pound male dogs to steer clear of the Stinson dogs, suggests a kind of pecking order.
He had strong views on the magazines too, didn't he? About registering dogs after just 3 wins.
Yeah, he saw it as risky. He basically labels you a professional dog fighter, invites trouble, maybe felony charges, and he was dismissive of people retiring dogs so quickly.
Gurley thought a dog's career should be longer, more tested. He even claims that some big names like Don Mayfield and Raymond Holt didn't actually know how to condition dogs properly.
Pretty bold statement. And that story about selling the gunner dog to Danny Burton.
Right. When Burton asked about neutering, Leem apparently told him straight up he'd bought a combat dog, not a brood dog. Very direct.
And his suspicions around the fight where Ruby beat Pal Red, suggesting poison or something else illicit might have been involved.
It paints a picture of a world where he perceived potential cheating or foul play wasn't uncommon.
He even takes a swipe at outside critics, referencing a drafts-dodging sissy on the TV show Hard Copy who spoke out against dogfighting, shows his defensiveness.
Yet, despite all the controversy surrounding it, he emphasizes the sheer competitiveness involved.
Yeah, he advises people, once they get 3 wins, to actively seek out and challenge the champions. Don't just sit back.
And he kind of positions himself, doesn't he, as having achieved his own level of fame, maybe now more as an advisor than a direct competitor.
It's interesting, he states he stopped fighting dogs himself in '83 when it became a felony in Texas.
but then returned to building the treadmills after going to a pig-picking event for dog fighters in 1993.
Suggests he remained connected to that community, just in a different role. He even offers specific advice for handling a dog during a contest.
Yeah, that was interesting. Said not to get right in the dog's face constantly. Wait until the opponent shows signs of faltering.
The idea being to let your dog use those lulls to recover?
Yeah.
Maybe a bit more strategic than just constant yelling.
Seems that way. It shows an understanding of pacing, even within the fight itself.
And finally, he gives some tips on raising puppies, too.
Back to that narrow waist idea. Start them lean. He suggests feeding basic dried food, but adding a little chicken baby food and water.
Why the baby food and water?
Primarily for moisture, he says, and to help with digestion. It's all about setting up that lean, conditioned physique right from the start.
So, wrapping this up, it's pretty clear Robert Leem's approach was, well, intricate, deeply detailed, reflecting very specific beliefs formed within that subculture.
Definitely. We've seen those core ideas. The training led by the dog's own rhythm on his special treadmill, the obsessive monitoring of recovery via heart rate, and this absolute focus on preserving life-sustaining fat through diet and careful workload management.
And yet, while the source material deals with a deeply controversial activity, looking closely at his methods gives us this unique, detailed window into a very specific, very intense approach to animal training and the mindset behind it.
So for you, the learner, here's something to think about. Even taking this out of its original, highly controversial context, are there underlying principles here that might echo elsewhere? Think about understanding individual recovery needs, tailoring training or learning to someone's natural rhythm, the importance of a reliable energy source for sustained effort.
Right. Could these ideas, maybe observation, tailoring the approach, focusing on recovery, apply in completely different fields, in your own life, maybe in learning, or performance in other areas?
What can be learned about sheer dedication, maybe meticulous observation, even when looking at such an intense and, let's face it, ethically fraught domain? Something to ponder. That concludes this deep dive.